Truistery Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
Truistery Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. A filament-thin moon hung over Santa Fe when Zephyra Lys nudged open the hand-painted door of La Paloma Bistro. The host glanced up, clearly expecting the silk-draped daughter of the virile spa dynasty. Instead, he found a 22-year-old wearing a borrowed emerald cocktail dress who seemed tugged at the faint clay stains beneath her fingernails. Zephyra let the rough pad of her thumb brush the amber pendant at her throat, a shard of a broken pot her father had kiln-fired years ago, then forced herself to glide forward as if she inhabited satin every day. 30 minutes earlier, she had been scrubbing mineral dust from ceramic tiles behind the virile estate. Now she was masquerading as a sold virile, a favor demanded by the very woman who paid her hourly wage. "Just say you're me," Isolde had hissed, tossing the dress across Zephyra's narrow bed in the servants' wing. "Smile. Refuse the match. And I'll forget the little accident with the shattered vase." The threat had been clear. Reject the ruse and lose the job that kept her father's dialysis going. Table 11 waited beside a floor-to-ceiling window, candlelight flickering against hand-troweled adobe. Seated with angular composure was Orion Frost, 30, CEO of EcoPort Freight. The wunderkind who had convinced half the Pacific Rim to move cargo via hydrogen-electric rail. Photographs online usually framed him aloof, jaw set, eyes arctic. Here, however, he looked almost relaxed, fingers tracing idle rings in the condensation of his mineral water. Zephyra inhaled the spice of pinion smoke drifting from the open fireplace and rehearsed the first sentence Isolde had scripted. "Mr. Frost, it's an honor, but I don't believe in arranged alliances." Yet when Orion stood, 6 feet of purposeful grace, charcoal jacket tailored to shoulders made for rowing, her mind short-circuited. She offered a palm suddenly damp, prayed he wouldn't notice, and sat. "Miss Virile," he began, voice sanded smooth by northwestern rain. "Thank you for agreeing to dinner, though I suspect your mother's assistant did the arm-twisting." She smiled, a real smile this time, because the speculation was delightfully accurate. "My schedule is flexible." A waiter appeared, placing amuse-bouches that resembled miniature desert landscapes, prickly pear gel, smoked elk crumble, micro-cactus greens. Orion thanked the man, then glanced at a leather-bound sustainability index tucked under his own menu. Zephyra's heart double-kicked. EcoPort's annual report had been the one corporate document she'd read cover to cover in the public library, wedged between shifts at the pottery shed. The idea of a cargo empire measuring success in kilograms of carbon avoided had lit her imagination like kiln flame. Now she was expected to dismiss its architect within an hour. "Before we start," Orion said, leaning in just enough that his cologne, cedar, rosemary, overlaid the fireplace smoke, "I'd like your opinion on La Paloma's sourcing. Their website claims net zero, but the chili still ships from Veracruz." Isolde would have blinked. Zephyra instead set down her linen napkin, forgetting the pre-written script. "Veracruz to Santa Fe is roughly 1,500 miles. She laid out the calculation in her head, voice steady. "That's 12 kilos of CO2 per pound of produce, assuming diesel trucking. Not truly net zero unless they buy offsets through a certified forest carbon project." Orion's brows rose the slightest fraction. "You run emissions math for fun?" She nearly said, "I glaze mugs for tourists." Instead, "I like numbers that tell the truth." For the next 20 minutes, he tested her with questions about regenerative agriculture, last-mile delivery drones, even ceramic thermal batteries. Zephyra answered cautiously but eagerly. Each exchange peeled back a fragment of her fabricated identity, threatening exposure. Still, the conversation crackled, 2 flints sparking in dry air. Entrees arrived, blue corn-crusted trout, heritage beans, roasted chayote. Orion thanked the waiter again, then sampled a bite. Tastes incredible, he admitted, though the ingredient sheet is longer than a merger contract. Zephyra forked a mouthful, the flavors bright and earthy. Yet guilt pinched her ribs. Every passing second tightened the noose of deceit. She pictured Isolde lounging somewhere, phone buzzing with influencer alerts, utterly unconcerned about the charade's fallout. Midway through the course, Orion's expression shifted, not colder, exactly, but assessing, like a surveyor mapping fault lines beneath adobe. "Ms. Viral," he began, "our parents believe a shared portfolio makes a sturdy foundation. Do you?" Zephyra folded her hands. The amber shard dangled against hollow clavicle. "Tell him no," Isolde's voice ordered in memory. "Walk away, and our lives diverge." But another voice whispered, the one that hummed while she sketched storyboards under a 60-watt bulb, dreaming of children laughing over her picture books. That voice said, "What if a door this rare never opens again?" "I think," she said, choosing words like slackline steps, "a foundation needs honesty first. Then perhaps investment, whether financial or emotional, makes sense." Orion's gaze held hers. In candle glow, his eyes weren't Arctic. They were Northern Lights green, shifting with unseen currents. "Honesty," he echoed, a low syllable. "Then let's be honest. Did you want to come tonight?" A knife clinked porcelain somewhere behind them. Zephyra's breath trembled. The truth poised on her tongue. "I'm not Isolde Viral. I'm her housekeeper." Confession would detonate everything. Her father's clinic bills, the fragile curiosity in Orion's eyes. The last shreds of dignity she'd managed to stitch into a borrowed dress. She settled on a half-truth. "I didn't expect to." Her pulse hammered. "But I'm glad I did." Something softened across his features, surprise tempered with something startlingly like relief. He raised his glass of mineral water in toast. To unexpected company. They clinked. Bubbles rose between them, silver beads spiraling upward like promises. Dessert followed, mesquite flower tort with lavender cream, but the mood had shifted again. Zephyra sensed the evening sliding toward a crossroads. Walk out now, she'd depart with a paycheck, a secret, and memories sweet as agave. Stay longer, risk questions no alibi could parry. Orion reached for the leather folio. "May I ask one more candid question?" he said, fingers pausing before he signed. She nodded. "If you could change one thing about how our families conduct business, what would it be?" The query struck deeper than she expected. She pictured the Viral Estate's back lot, bins overflowing with single-use plastic spa bottles, then her father's cramped studio, every shard recycled into mosaic. "I'd make accountability visible," she answered softly. "Not hidden in CSR reports, visible on factory floors, in paychecks, on shipping labels." She met his gaze. "Truth you can hold in your hand." Orion inhaled, as if memorizing the sentence. Then he scrawled a tip, closed the folio. "Ms. Viral, this has been illuminating." Outside, desert wind had freshened, clouds scud over the low moon. Orion offered his arm, gallant, unhurried. Zephyra hesitated, then laid fingers against the fine wool. They stepped onto the plaza's stonework where buskers packed guitars and tourists licked last trails of sorbet. A sleek electric SUV idled at the curb, EcoPort logo subtle on its door. The driver opened Zephyra's side first. Orion waited until she slid in, then circled to his seat. As the vehicle hummed toward the adobe arch of Canyon Road, Zephyra stared at the passing art studios, each window glowing with oil landscapes she could never afford. Her phone vibrated in the clutch Isolde had supplied. One text. "How's my fiancé? Dump him yet?" The winking emoji scorched her vision. She typed 2 words, "almost done," and hit send. The SUV halted outside the Viral Estate's wrought iron gate. Orion turned toward her, profile limned by dashboard lights. "I'll walk you to the door," he said. Panic zinged. Servant quarters lay separate, and Rowena might lurk behind a curtain. "That's kind, but unnecessary," she blurted. "Security cameras, my mother's very strict." Orion studied her a moment longer than polite. Then he nodded. "Good night, Ms. Viral." "Good night, Mr. Frost." She stepped onto gravel, pulse in ears. As the SUV whirred away, Zephyra exhaled the breath she'd hoarded since sunset. Above, Orion's taillights faded like two rubies swallowed by dark hills. Inside the silent estate, she tiptoed past latte-colored corridors to her attic room. The borrowed dress slipped off, pools of green satin on cracked floorboards. She folded it with reverence she didn't feel, tugged on threadbare pajamas. Only when she traced the amber shard at her neck did the weight of the evening settle. Orion Frost valued integrity. Tomorrow, if truth surfaced, he would see betrayal in tonight's half-truths. Yet honesty might cost her father's life. She lay on the narrow cot, listening to juniper branches scrape the tin roof, and wondered which debt weighed more, the one she owed her conscience, or the one she owed the man whose heart now ticked unexpectedly alongside hers. Somewhere downtown, she imagined Orion staring at the Santa Fe skyline, replaying every answer she'd given. Did he sense the missing pieces? Did it matter yet? Moonlight slid across the room, silvering a sketch pad on her bedside table. Zephyra reached for a pencil. On blank paper, she drew a tiny cargo train, hydrogen vapor curling upward to form a question mark that hovered above a young woman in a too-large dress. Beneath, she wrote the title of a story only half begun. When names are borrowed and truth hides in candlelight. Then she set the pad aside, closed her eyes, and waited for dawn to reveal which identity would greet it. The storm rolled in without a lightning herald, just a sudden hiss of wind ripping across the parched New Mexico mesa. Inside the virile estate staff wing, Zephyra Lys had barely unlaced her borrowed emerald heels when the hallway lamps flickered. In the shifting light stood Rowena Virile, silk robe cinched tight enough to strangle the gold embroidery. "Where's Isolde?" Rowena's voice cracked like dry cedar. "Still out, ma'am," Zephyra answered, pulse skipping. Isolde had sent a single text, "Deter to Taos, don't wait up." That left Zephyra alone on the chopping block. Rowena held up a jagged shard of porcelain, the remnants of a broken La Palme spa diffuser. "You left cleaning rags on the balcony." Wind toppled the display. $5,000 of product gone. Her gaze traveled from Zephyra's still-perfect makeup to the clay-scarred knuckles. "And you reek of deceit. My daughter would never forget to reapply lipstick after dinner." The veneer cracked. Zephyra's throat tightened. "Mrs. Virile, Save it." Rowena thrust a printed NDA toward her. "Sign and disappear. Tonight. If you utter one syllable about the substitution, I'll make sure every clinic in the state knows Arturo Lys can't pay his medical bills." Outside, thunderless wind punched the windows. Zephyra's signature looked like a child's scrawl on the glossy form. Rowena snapped a photo of Zephyra handing the document back, proof of mutual consent. The woman sneered, then turned on her stiletto heel. In 20 minutes, Zephyra had stuffed her life into a faded canvas duffel, 3 thrift store blouses, a sketch pad, the small tin box that held dialysis receipts, and the amber pendant still looped around her neck. The emerald dress she folded carefully onto Isolde's vanity, a silent declaration that some debts were paid. When she stepped onto the gravel drive, the estate's wrought iron gate clanged shut behind her, locking with a digital beep that sounded disturbingly cheerful. Sand gusted in horizontal sheets. Within seconds, grit coated her lashes, ponytail whipped like a frayed flag. The nearest bus stop lay 2 miles downhill. She could barely see the saguaros, just vague silhouettes swaying under sodium street lamps. Each gust felt personal, as if the desert itself disapproved of imposters. Halfway to the highway, a tumbleweed slammed into her knees, knocking the duffel from her shoulder. Papers scattered, clinic invoices, library overdue slips, the half-finished storyboards she guarded like treasure. Zephyra dropped to her knees, hunting pages with numb fingers, praying that ink wouldn't smear in the airborne grit. Headlights bloomed through the dust, an SUV cutting cautiously along the ridge road. She froze. Rowena might have dispatched security to reclaim the NDA. But the vehicle was sleek, matte charcoal, bearing a subtle green and white logo she recognized instantly. EcoPort Freight. The passenger window slid down, revealing Orion Frost behind the wheel, jaw shadowed with late-night stubble. MS. Virile, he called over the wind, confusion etched between stormlit brows. Any facade crumbled in that moment. Zephyra stood, hair plastered to her cheeks. Emerald eyeshadow streaked into abstract art. Not exactly, she managed. Orion's gaze swept the scattered papers, the duffel, the borrowed heels dangling from her other hand like defeated birds. Get in, he said, no hesitation, just quiet command. She hesitated. I can't. Because you aren't who I thought you were, he concluded, voice steady. A gust rocked the car.
Fine.
Then get in because the particulate count just hit, hazardous, and your lungs will hate you by dawn. Logic overrode pride. Zephyra scooped the final sheet, a watercolor of a little girl riding a hydrogen locomotive, and slid into the passenger seat. Warm air scented of cedar enveloped her. The contrast made her shiver. For several miles, Orion said nothing. The SUV's lidar pinged softly as it mapped blowing debris. Finally, he offered a stainless steel water bottle. Looked like you swallowed half the desert. She gulped, grains of sand grinding between her molars. Thank you. Want to tell me your real name? Her throat flexed. Zephyra. Zephyra Lys. He repeated it as if memorizing a formula. Zephyra. A beat of silence. And you're not Rowena Virile's daughter. Just her contractor. The NDA loomed in her imagination, but the urge to be truthful won. Housekeeper, sometimes potter. Occasional decoy. Orion absorbed that with a fractional nod. Outside, the storm's fury escalated, sand pinging metal like hail. Where can I take you? I'll figure it out, she said quickly. Drop me at the Route 14 junction. A 24-hour diner squatted there. Maybe she could barter dishwashing for a booth till sunrise. Instead of agreeing, Orion pulled into an overlook, stone terrace jutting above a dark canyon, killed the engine, and turned toward her. Console lights cast gentle green over his features. Earlier tonight, he said. Asked if you wanted to come. Your answer felt truncated. Let's finish the sentence. Zephyra gripped the water bottle. I wanted to keep my job. My father's dialysis costs more than I make in a month. That broken diffuser? He shook his head. Rowena pays $30 wholesale, marks it to $5,000. She staged the threat. Heat rose behind Zephyra's eyes. Doesn't matter. She owns my next paycheck. Not anymore. He pulled a slim tablet from the console, tapped, swiped. There. EcoPort's hardship grant. One-time wire. Recipient Arturo Lys, Santa Rosa Clinic. He angled the screen. A 5-digit figure glowed. No streams, no publicity. Words fled Zephyra's brain. Wind buffeted the SUV. But she barely felt it. Why would you? Because someone who calculates tortilla-to-carbon ratios for fun deserves a fair shot. A wry curve lifted one corner of his mouth. And because I dislike bullies, corporate or otherwise. Tears blurred everything. She scrubbed them away, mortified. Thank you. I don't have another word big enough. Thank you works. He slipped the tablet away, restarted the engine. Where to now? I hear the Sandia Shuttle Motel is generous with night rates. She pictured the sagging neon sign, the questionable carpets. There's a 24-hour diner at the junction. I'll regroup there. Orion considered, clearly unimpressed with her plan. Diner it is. But you're eating first. 10 minutes later, they parked beneath the flickering star of Cosmo's all-night cafe. Inside, the jukebox hummed classic blues, a lone trucker nursed coffee. Orion claimed a booth, ordered 2 green chili omelets. Extra tortillas. Zephyra's stomach growled loud enough that both of them laughed, storm tension breaking like a brittle pot. Between bites, she told him about Arturo's workshop, how each mug bore a constellation glaze, how medical bills forced them to sell kills. She did not mention the picture book dreams. Some hopes were fragile as unfired clay. Orion reciprocated in pieces. Childhood summers on Washington's San Juan Islands, watching cargo ferries belch smoke and vowing to do better. A scholarship, a garage prototype, a billion-dollar green freight network. Through it all, he confessed, he trusted numbers before names, until a woman in a borrowed dress spoke numbers with moral conviction. Omelets disappeared, coffee cooled. Outside, wind quieted, grains twirling in hush rather than assault. Orion checked radar. Storm cells drifting southeast. I can get you to Albuquerque. Airport hotels are safer. Zephyra traced the rim of her mug. Thank you, but the clinic wire is already too much. Pride, a brittle, stubborn shard, would not let her accept another rescue. He respected the boundary with a slow nod. At the counter, he paid both tabs, tucked a 50 under Zephyra's cup for bus fare. When they stepped into dawn-tinged air, misty sand eddied at their ankles. Orion opened the SUV hatch, produced a charcoal gray field jacket embroidered with the EcoPort leaf. For the chill, he said. She slid into it. Sleeves swallowed her wrists, but warmth spread instantly. They stood facing each other beside the idling car. Pale light outlined Orion's profile, strong nose, thoughtful mouth. This isn't goodbye, he said quietly. Santa Fe's small in the map of my routes. Zephyra wanted to believe that. Yet a CEO's orbit seldom intersected that of an unemployed housekeeper. Travel safe, Mr. Frost. Orion, he corrected, offering his hand. She clasped it, calloused palm meeting business smooth skin. Zephyra, she repeated, as if the name might finally feel real. He climbed in, windows tinting. The SUV glided toward Interstate 25, taillights dimming like distant campfires. Zephyra stood until the dust settled, jacket collar hugging her chin, $50 bill warm in her pocket, like possibility. The diner's neon star buzzed overhead, half working, half dreaming, just like her. She hoisted the duffel, drew a long breath scented with coffee and faraway rain, and stepped back inside to plan the first chapter of whatever life came next. The Night Eagle coach exhaled a hiss and drifted into Seattle at the fragile edge of dawn, its windows fogged by salt-laden mist rising from Elliott Bay. And Zephyra Lys stepped onto rain-sheened pavement with Orion Frost's charcoal field jacket draped over her shoulders like a borrowed oath. She had crossed 1,000 arid miles in 20 unrestful hours. Yet adrenaline kept her upright while neon signs jittered above the terminal cafe promising espresso now to anyone who dared keep their eyes open. A tall woman wearing slate-gray athleisure waited beneath the flickering letters, clutching a placard printed simply with the initials Z.L. I'm Marit, household coordinator. The stranger announced, voice as precise as a metronome. Mr. Frost asked that I deliver you safely to the residence. There was no space for hesitation, only a polite inclination of the head before Zephyra followed Marit through sliding doors and into an electric crossover whose silence felt more luxurious than leather. The vehicle glided uphill along Queen Anne's damp streets, passing moss velvet walls, madrona trunks twisted like burnt cinnamon, and porches still glowing with porchlight constellations as if night refused to surrender completely. Dawn sharpened the skyline, gulls pinwheeled over cranes, and the sound of the city, half ocean, half orbit, reached Zephyra like a welcome written in water. Beyond a cedar gate rose the Frost home, a pavilion of cedar and glass rather than a mansion. Angular rooflines forming wings that seemed ready to lift, glazing turning the faintest light into liquid amber. Vertical wind turbines rotated lazily among sword ferns while solar shingles glittered like dragon scales across the steep roof. The front doors parted without human touch, triggered by an unseen algorithm that recognized guests before they knocked. Inside, muffled floorboards of reclaimed maple whispered beneath Zephyra's thrifted boots. A recycled glass chandelier spiraled overhead, scattering fractured rainbows across ivory walls. She was almost afraid to breathe. Marit placed a slim tablet, orientation schedule, pantry inventory, security panel codes, into Zephyra's hands and dissolved into ambient hush. Seconds later, another presence crystallized from the stillness. Eloan Frost entered wearing a graphite pantsuit so sharply tailored it might have been forged, silver-shot hair twisted into a knot that suggested both discipline and restraint. Her Arctic eyes performed a scanner-level assessment of Zephyra and her duffel before she spoke. "You are the accelerated hire," she stated, not bothering with a question mark. "In this house we value discretion, punctuality, and craft. Show all three. Rest 1 hour, burn out waste talent, then report to the greenhouse." A single curt nod concluded the treaty. Zephyra found her studio in the staff wing. Minimalist bed, built-in desk, floor-to-ceiling window framing fairies that carved pale wakes across pewter water. Curiosity overcame exhaustion. So she followed motion-sensitive lights to the greenhouse. Humid warmth greeted her like an embrace. Aeroponic towers misted basil and butter lettuce. Sensors blinked teal. An irrigation arm hummed lullabies of engineering elegance. Drawers labeled soil. Experimental slid out to reveal clay and mycelium pellets, so perfectly cast her father's potter instincts thrummed. "Those micro-universes are my invention," said a melodic voice behind her. Dr. Eris Yamane, botanist, leaned on a titanium crutch, shaved side haircut framing bright eyes behind rose-gold glasses. When Zephyra identified the clay mix, porosity near 94%, Eris beamed and immediately deputized her to log humidity for a clutch of ghost orchids that rewarded only gentle hands. The task felt sacred. Her father had taught her to honor any living thing relying on her attention. By midday, Zephyra harvested microgreens, ironed linens scented with bergamot, and prepared Aloan's lunch: miso-glazed barley, soy-marinated 6-minute egg, artful curls of mint. Presenting the bowl, she saw the matriarch's reserved expression soften. "Poverty refines a palate," Aloan mused after one contemplative bite. "You waste nothing, and you season twice." The sentence struck Zephyra like a tuning fork, vibrating with unexpected kinship. The House AI announced. "Vehicle arriving. Orion Frost, ETA 4 minutes." Heartbeats accelerated. Orion entered, carrying Pacific rain on his shoulders. Charcoal, slacks damp. Fatigue lingering at the edge of sea-green eyes that nonetheless brightened when they found Zephyra alive and unbroken. Formality surrendered to shared laughter when she joked that the greenhouse had survived day one. Evening reconfigured again when Aloan instructed Zephyra to dine with them at the oak table and produced a leather notebook titled Financial Literacy for Creatives. Administering rapid-fire questions on compound interest, cash reserve ratios, index fund drag. Zephyra missed 2 answers and aced 5. Orion watched, arms folded, pride disguised as amusement. A phone vibrated. Calanthe Rue, gleeful provocateur, had posted a doctored photo. Orion guiding Zephyra in a Sold's emerald dress, headline howling that EcoPort CEO kept a mistress housekeeper. Arctic silence iced the room. Orion, jaw set, left for the calm suite, Aloan reminding him that battles require cold math, not hot blood. Rain-stitched cedar shingles long past midnight. Carrying folded linens, Zephyra glimpsed Orion in the library silhouetted against storm-shrouded glass. He apologized for reputational shrapnel, promised legal shields, and vowed not to use her name without consent. She, voice trembling, asked if he felt ashamed. Orion answered that shame is incompatible with respect for someone who balances tomato pH, freight tariffs, and kindness. Lightning welded their reflections in the window, his tall outline, her smaller figure wrapped in his jacket, and a new weather system gathered behind her ribs. At 5 a.m., her greenhouse alarm chimed. She logged orchid moisture, coaxed UV lamp strawberries to blush, whisked oat milk Dutch baby batter, and slid pans into the convection oven. Orion entered, tie askew from a night of counteroffensives, and devoured pancakes crowned with warm berries and honey dust, relief softening his shoulders. Trolls would swarm, headlines crackle. Maybe lawyers posture, yet Dawn still carried vanilla steam and Aloan's next finance chapter. Marit reappeared mid-morning to induct Zephyra into the sorting alcove, a stainless chamber where avocado pits and circuit boards traveled through color-coded chutes toward compost digesters or rare earth recyclers. "This is the mouth of the house," Marit said, tapping a panel of live waste metrics. Feed it nonsense, and the lungs breathe nonsense back. Zephyra loved the metaphor. She scribbled a note in her father's weathered sketchbook. Dusk painted Seattle slate blue when Zephyra climbed the roof deck, notebook on her knee, sketching the skyline. Space Needle glowing like a tracer, port cranes spiking the horizon, barges crawling like luminous beetles. Orion appeared, shoulders wrapped in a rain-dark suit jacket, asking whether she had found a favorite view yet. She pointed at the chaotic beauty below. Conversation settled onto a teak bench varnished to resist salt, city grids blinking beneath them. Orion confided that Aloan trusted very few people quickly, and Zephyr replied that Aloan reminded her of high-desert sandstone, seemingly cold, yet swiftly warmed by honest light. Orion laughed, a sound of admittance rather than amusement, then traced a goal's arc and admitted the scandal had almost made him cancel every meeting for a month. She told him about Zephyra Lys, kiln master of cracked glazes, who named each firing after constellations and smashed imperfect bowls rather than sell hollow beauty. Orion listened, posture tilting forward as though afraid to miss a fracture in her voice. Clouds parted. Moonlight spilled silver over cedar planks. Orion turned that glow into a promise. My world traffics in billions, he said, and sometimes I forget a mosaic cup can hold an entire night sky. Thank you for reminding me. A marine gust rattled turbine vanes. Instinctively, he removed a suit jacket and layered it over Zephyra's existing field shell. Double-armored, he teased. Foghorns murmured below. And somewhere in the city's shared breath a 15-year-old version of Zephyra, who once dreamed beneath tar paper roofing, recognized that she was drafting blueprints of her own future. They lingered until Marit's voice crackled over the intercom announcing updated risk analytics. The spell folded like starch linen. Orion escorted her to the staff corridor and paused outside her door. Rest, he said, velvet-wrapped authority, then gently readjusted the cracked amber pendant at her collarbone. Align your compass. She whispered goodnight, yet heard her pulse louder than speech. Inside, she opened Arturo's sketchbook, its pages dusted by desert silence, and began a new entry. Seattle Day 1. Houses can possess digestive organs, finance can masquerade as art, courage sometimes borrows 2 jackets. She pressed a living microgreen leaf onto the paper as a bookmark that would wilt but leave a stain. At 1:30 the clock ticked with submarine patience. She slid the sketchbook beneath her pillow. Certain that whatever hurricane brewed, tabloid accusations, corporate feints, virile vengeance, the orchids would still need misting, the succulents would still tilt toward dawn, and the enigmatic Frost household would continue humming its encrypted invitation, belong, belong, belong. And somewhere beyond the tormented algorithms and gossip feeds, a pair of ghost orchids prepared to bloom, proving that authentic growth always insists on its own bright and carefully measured timetable tomorrow. Orion Frost learned long ago that a freight graph could predict almost anything, except the precise second the world would decide to distrust his eyes. At 3:17 a.m., inside the blue glow of Frost Residence's subterranean situation suite, he watched a counterfeit video bloom across social networks, like toxic algae. The clip showed him, an avatar flawlessly mimicking the scar on his brow, leaning between basal towers in the greenhouse to kiss Zephyra Lys, the household's new horticultural steward. Every pixel felt maliciously perfect, color-graded steam, borrowed audio from a CNBC interview, and whispers bent into corporate seduction. Within minutes, trolls stapled her name to his like faulty solder, memes labeled her greenhouse geisha, and EcoPort Futures hiccuped crimson. Marit, the household coordinator, escalated the alert. Aloan Frost, Orion's mother and the unforgiving spine of the family corporation, convened an emergency council in the maple-paneled library while rain needled skylights overhead. Council Priya Becky dialed forensic analysts at Deep Trace Labs. Dr. Eris Yamane sprinted on her titanium crutch to gather raw camera feeds. Zephyra arrived in slippers. Orion's charcoal field jacket draped around her shoulders like reluctant armor. No one bothered second-guessing the danger. They attacked it with spreadsheets and heartbeat fast code. Aloan sketched a 3-tier response on the smart wall. certify the forgery, expose it publicly before rumor calcified, convert scandal into societal infrastructure. We refuse to fight in shadows, she declared. Priya outlined chain of custody procedures. Eris promised a demonstration using plant microvibrations to prove the video synthetic. Zephyra volunteered to speak on record. Orion hesitated, fearing additional exposure, but Eloan overruled him. Hiding a target only teaches bullies to aim at phantoms. 48 sleepless hours later, Hangar 9, EcoPort's carbon-negative warehouse, became a truth theater. Hydrogen locomotives idled like patient whales behind a dais of screens. Reporters, drones, and citizen streamers crowded catwalks smelling of steel and rosemary disinfectant. Priya opened with spectral heat maps highlighting neon fissures where GAN stitches bled. Eris followed, explaining that real leaves flutter at frequencies impossible to fake without modeling laminar airflow. Raw greenhouse footage rolled beside the forgery. Jitter analysis spoke louder than apology. When Orion stepped forward, he announced the relaunch fund. $10 million in capital plus 1 million personal shares dedicated to legal and technical defense for victims of synthetic defamation. This is obligation, not charity, he insisted. Questions flew. Was EcoPort greenwashing? Could the fund sway regulators? Orion invited auditors, offering real-time supplier dashboards. Stock dipped 3%, then climbed 5%. The internet, however, evolves like bacteria under antibiotics. Rowena viral, furious her first attack failed, fed Calanthe Rue a second story. Bogus whistleblower files accusing EcoPort of exploiting Chilean lithium miners. The hashtag #greenwashgold trended within an hour. Mar traced the leak to a viral holding server. Priya cautioned against immediate litigation. Eloan ordered an open audit. Independent watchdogs received live credentials. They confirmed the mines were geothermal-powered cooperatives. Flipping narrative again. Thus the relaunch blueprint expanded. Beyond grants, it would release an open curriculum toolkit for media forensic literacy. Creative Commons licensed, so every civics class could teach counterpropaganda. Zephyra proposed including modules on economic coercion, anonymizing her NDA with Rowena as case study. Orion approved. Eloan scheduled pilot sessions. The launch gala inhabited a decommissioned grain silo retrofitted with bamboo scaffolding and solar lanterns. Entry required guests to submit one documented instance of hope printed on seed paper. Ghost orchids framed the stage, petals glowing like honest snow. Zephyra delivered the keynote walking a spiral catwalk so mezzanine scholarship students felt addressed. She raised her amber pendant, once kiln trash, now light catcher, arguing that fractured stories can refract radiance. Applause rattled corrugated walls. Rowena's final gambit, an anonymous tip alleging sabotage at EcoPort's hydrogen pier, dissolved under a crowdsourced live-stream inspection. Regulators later adopted the protocol as auditing template. University courses requested relaunch lesson kits, and late-night hosts roasted deepfake gullibility instead of Zephyra's dignity. 3 weeks after the hoax began, Arturo Lys watched his daughter testify before the European Digital Safety Council. Clinic nurses pinned her photo under a caption reading, "Truth in 4K." At home, the household AI auto-flagged manipulated clips using the public fingerprint library. Eloan published an op-ed urging venture capital to underwrite data integrity commons. Eris released plant microtremor datasets under a license forbidding weaponization. Priya testified before Congress, citing Hangar 9 logs as model evidence. Rain cleared. One evening, Zephyra found Orion on the roof deck beneath projection drone auroras. He apologized. She thanked him. Redundancy became comfort. Then he kissed her, gentle, real, wind riffling her hair, and algorithms could attempt to counterfeit the moment, yet basil leaves in the greenhouse rustled. Microvibrations already logged. Months passed. The relaunch fund surpassed $50 million through match donations. Startups integrated its watermark API. Fact-check plugins popped confetti whenever users debunked a fake. Arturo received a package, a blooming ghost orchid cutting, forensic curricula, and a note from Orion thanking him for teaching Zephyra patient heat. Arturo placed the orchid beside a kiln firing glaze the color of fresh basil, sculpting vessels worthy of reality. Zephyra toured from Ohio to Okinawa, explaining how curiosity and low-cost spectrum toolkits puncture propaganda membranes. Under each auditorium seat, she taped packets of greenhouse seeds labeled "Truth Germinates." She told students to sprout them near laptops as reminders that authenticity, like seedlings, demands light, water, and watchful hands. On a mild autumn night, the Frost household gathered for a roof deck dinner celebrating publication of Zephyra's essay in Scientific American. Leaf oscillation as passive deepfake sensor. Marit served rosemary mocktails. Eris toasted to unexpected alliances. Priya waved Supreme Court amicus briefs. Aloan, face soft in lantern glow, announced she had placed part of her estate into a public trust funding civic signal infrastructure. Orion voiced a toast, promising ever-iterative maps of accountability. Zephyra, heart-buoyant, added a wish. May every life force the world to invent sturdier truths faster than malice can replicate. Glasses clinked beneath turbine hum, and Seattle's skyline shimmered not with screens but with human resilience, a city, a family, and a gardener of algorithms all growing toward the same honest light. A fortnight later, the first high school cohort to finish the relaunch curriculum toured the Frost greenhouse. 20 teenagers stepped from an electric bus and found a laboratory where humidity charts sat beside myth-busting storyboards. Zephyra, sleeves rolled, demonstrated basal voltage converted into MIDI notes, turning leaves into soft synthesizers. Students laughed. The greenhouse sang. At noon, Orion joined, guiding them through the hydrogen yard where locomotives whispered like distant wails. He challenged students to trace supply chains of their phones, handing out blank flowcharts. Cobalt mined, smelted, sold, assembled, discarded. Map every footprint, he urged, or profiteers rewrite the map. A sophomore asked if the quest ever ended. Orion replied, the map keeps moving because the planet keeps rewriting itself. Their visit concluded in the atrium where Aloan served lentil sage stew from a solar cooker. A shy student named Giselle asked how she reconciled wealth with justice. Aloan answered that capital is heat. Under fire crumbles clay, over fire shatters it. Our mission, she said, is to hold temperature. Her phrase outtrended 2 senator speeches that day. After the bus departed, Eris tested a prototype sensor translating leaf conductivity into LED pulses along the greenhouse ceiling. Each row now blinked Morse code spelling Latin names and timestamps, poetry in chlorophyll. Priya joked even lettuce possessed 2-factor authentication. Marit added the data stream to a public dashboard, turning transparency from slogan into substance. As drought worsened in the Southwest, Zephyra proposed shipping surplus greens to New Mexico kitchens via Orion's freight network. EcoPort absorbed costs. Arturo coordinated distribution, rolling boxes of Seattle kale into Adobe food banks where elders tasted chlorophyll bright as childhood. Cynics online called it optics, but volunteers uploaded unfiltered gratitude. And algorithms could not conceal genuine smiles. Rowena Viral attempted another strike, commissioning a boutique AI studio to forge ledgers linking EcoPort to shell company bribery. The studio had quietly partnered with Relaunch. Its ethics demon flagged the request and forwarded evidence to Priya. Rowena was subpoenaed within 72 hours, becoming Exhibit 0 at a symposium titled When Algorithms Snitch on Bad Actors, co-hosted by Deep Trace and the ACLU. January's snow-dusted Seattle. Ghost orchids produce seed pods. A mythic rarity. Eris, Zephyra, and Orion collected capsules at dawn, sealing them for zero-gravity germination aboard a sustainability mission. Commentators marveled that a scandal could birth orbital botany. On launch eve, the core team gathered again on the roof deck. Zephyra handed Orion a ceramic mug fired by Arturo, inscription inside. Cartography of truth is iterative. Aloan set a floating lantern in a copper basin to honor lies defeated, not to forget them but to remember their shapes learning. Grandmother Soraya Frost, 81 years unyielding and glittering with opinions, maintained that true temperament reveals itself only when blood sugar drops, tools malfunction, and nobody is watching. When social feeds finally moved past the Frost deepfake debacle, she declared the hour ripe to test Zephyra Lys, the desert-raised horticulturist who had somehow rewired both her grandson's heart and the family's public narrative. At 5:30 a.m., she rapped on Zephyra's suite, tossed a canvas duffel, and announced, "Juniper Ridge. Pack quickly." The hydrogen pickup Soraya drove smelled of cedar chips and old peppermint gum. She refused autopilot, claiming steering wheels remind restless souls direction must be earned, not downloaded. Seattle's mist became I-5 spray, then Columbia Gorge sunshaft. Then a ribbon of asphalt rising into sagebrush plateaus where cell signals flattened to dashes. Soraya quizzed Zephyra between mile markers. Ideal carbon to nitrogen for compost? 30-1. Hydraulic head lost per 100 feet of open ditch? Depends on grade. At sunset, the forge appeared. 900 regenerative acres tucked beneath basalt buttes, solar barns gleaming. Rotational paddocks stitched like quilt panels, and a century-old farmhouse whose galvanized roof blinked orange as though signaling airships. No staff stood waiting. Only laminated checklists taped to doors. Outsiders confuse luxury with service, Soraya remarked. Here the land serves, but only if you serve first. She handed Zephyra a thin ledger. Duties for each sun phase, blanks for runoff, columns for mistakes. Zephyra's room contained a cot, wax canvas blanket, and a window framing wolf peak. She set the pendant of kiln-fired amber on the sill, inhaled sage-scented air, and somehow slept soundly until meteor streaks pulled her into first light. Before coffee, she followed Soraya along gravity channels sluicing snowmelt into terraces. Frozen rabbits had chewed berm banks. They patched with shovels, palming mud until the leak clamped shut. Breakfast was sourdough heel drizzled with honey and lavender tea. When the ledger showed no omissions, Soraya's chin tipped a millimeter, not approval, permission to continue. Days acquired efficient rhythms. Morning, check drip emitters, record soil resistance, harvest kale big enough to shade a cat. Noon, stir compost windrows steaming like tired dragons. Sprinkle basalt dust. Listen for the sweet citrus note that signals perfect microbial fire. Evening, inspect outer fence where coyote tracks wove Roman cursive through silt. Every entry Zephyra inked into the ledger. Every night Soraya scanned columns beneath an oil lamp without comment or praise. On the fourth afternoon, storm-dark clouds draped the valley. An electric SUV kicked pebbles down the drive, gleaming like a too-polished boot. Cousin Ravian Frost, Executive Vice President for Timber Operations, jaw sharp as a fro, exited. Followed by Calanthe Rue, influencer-turned-fiancé, documenting arrival for 2 million followers. Calanthe's stilettos sank into dust. She shrieked lightly, then laughed for the phone. Ravian greeted Soraya, side-eyed Zephyra's calloused palms, and wondered why contract help occupied ancestor space. Soraya answered, "Rooms belong to whoever rises before roof-beam sparrows." Calanthe, intent on optics, fished out a velvet case containing a sapphire bangle said to be a Roosevelt-era gift to Soraya's mother. She fastened it dramatically. "Family gems deserve oxygen," she proclaimed as recording drones buzzed. That night, Zephyra served elk stew with rosemary dumplings. Ravian bragged about clear-cut profits and chuckled that regenerative logging was marketing garnish. Zephyra, voice soft, asked whether he tracked biodiversity rebound 5 years post-harvest. Calanthe filmed the awkward silence. Ravian replied that shareholders preferred dividends to newts. Soraya's eyebrow twitched like a loaded spring. High desert night arrived fast, moon icy. Stars exploding overhead. At 1:43 a.m., a barn loft sensor pinged silhouette alert to Soraya's tablet. She noted time and returned to sleep, letting data gather evidence quietly.
Dawn.
Calanthe burst into the kitchen, hairnet askew, screaming that the sapphire was gone. Ravian pointed at Zephyra, the only outsider, motive obvious. Soraya held up both palms. Accusations require proof. She marched them to the office, downloaded video from 6 solar cameras that recorded infrasound, thermal, and LiDAR layers. Zephyra's pulse raced, yet trusted photon loyalty. Playback, timestamp 1 hour 43 minutes and 12 seconds. Calanthe, clad in sparkling slippers, skulks across the yard, enters grain shed, removes the bangle, hides it inside a sack of alfalfa, text planted. Rowena will amplify. Ravian's face bleached paper white. He admitted Rowena Viral promised additional board votes if Zephyra were disgraced. Q reinforcements. Priam Becky arrived via self-driving jeep, verified hashes on site. Dr. Eris Yamane dialed in, confirming thermal profiles untampered. Calanthe shrieked deep fake. But LiDAR point clouds revealed her unique gate signature. Soraya delivered sentence. Ravian barred from family assemblies for 12 months. Calanthe exiled forever. Their SUV spun dust and vanity into the distance. Left behind, branches needed pruning before hail. Zephyra and Soraya worked wordless, sweat erasing decades. At sundown they shared imperfect apple galettes, crusts blistered, flavor exquisite. Soraya's laugh, rare low, like a new spring, filled the porch. 2 nights later dry lightning marched east. Wind shredded tarp, knocked weather mast, killed the inverter, and whipped Calanthe's abandoned evening dress into fence wire, flapping like a ragged flag. Zephyra raced to shield seedlings with hail cloth. Soraya anchored orchard ladders. A prop plane landed on the ranch strip delivering Orion with spare inverters. He and Zephyra reset breakers guided only by headlamps. When power returned, sprinklers sighed relief over dusty alfalfa. Dawn painted Wolf Peak rose gold. Soraya, still holding a lantern, announced the trial closed. Steel recognized steel, she said, eyes crinkling. She handed Zephyra a copper key flash drive containing 20 years of soil respiration data and invited her to co-author a peer-review paper. Zephyra stammered about credentials. Soraya snorted that iron pipeline start life as ore. Departure day glowed cobalt. Soraya fastened a thin gold wire bracelet around Zephyra's wrist, a single juniper berry encased in bioresin. Real gems record weather, not status, she said. She then passed an heirloom notebook. First page, yellowed 1942 clipping announcing the ranch purchase. Write tonight's lesson, she commanded. Zephyra's hands smelled of sage and resin when she wrote. Trust grips 2 handholds, vigilance, and generosity. Legacy is loyalty tempered under sun, hail, and unblinking stars. Orion loaded the pickup, lingering by the gate. Fences now felt wider than history. He asked Soraya if the test was truly over. She winked. Tests never end. They merely change textbooks. Then to Zephyra, come back next season and teach me something new. They drove north, sun low, air rich with pine. Beyond the rear view, Calanthe's shredded dress still fluttered on the fence. But a pair of bluebirds had already begun stealing threads for a nest, proof that even vanity can fertilize rebirth when storms pass. That evening they turned off the highway at an abandoned fire lookout converted into a micromuseum for native seed heritage. Inside, jars of obsidian beans, glacier peas, and wolf peach tomatoes lined cedar shelves. The volunteer curator, Aurelia Nighthawk, recognized Soraya's surname and unlocked a drawer labeled Juniper Provenance. She entrusted Zephyra with a vellum packet of lupin seeds gathered long before the interstate fractured pronghorn trails. Aurelia said the flowers fix nitrogen where other green gives up, and that the packet belonged with whoever still believes soil can forgive. Back on the road, Zephyra slept until thunder shook the cab. Orion had parked beneath a tin awning beside a single hydrogen pump. Rain drummed, smelling of creosote and dust. Over travel mug coffee, he admitted that success had always meant megawatts shipped and dividends declared. The forge taught him to recognize success in the speed someone runs toward hailstones to shelter seedlings. Zephyra laughed, brittle then warm, confessing she still feared fragile reputations more than actual storms. They drafted a plan to present Soraya's data at the Soil Sciences Summit. crediting every worker, whoever turned a compost fork. Near midnight, they crossed the Columbia. Bridge lights strobed across black water, matching the resin-encased juniper beads circling Zephyra's wrist. She rotated it, thinking of Soraya's maxim that genuine gems record weather rather than status. Behind them, lightning backlit Juniper Ridge, now distant, yet its lesson pulsed within their joined trajectory. Tempests, when met with honest labor and uncompromised data, calcify into growth rings that future stewards can read like topographic maps. They drove onward, seeds humming. Eloan Frost studied the Pacific twilight dripping across the greenhouse skylights and concluded that only theatrical romance could finish knitting her complicated household back together. For weeks, she had watched Zephyra Lys and her son Orion orbit each other like cautious moons, trading data, recipes, and flashlight smiles, yet never breaking that final fragile barrier. So the matriarch devised what she called a benevolent provocation. First, she summoned Zephyra to her office, an oak-paneled area smelling of sandalwood and old ledgers, and announced that a visiting venture capitalist named Calder Riven had requested a personal tour of the hydroponic arrays. Calder is clever, unattached, and charmed by innovation, Eloan said, sliding a photo across the glass. He finds you intriguing. Zephyra flushed, protested that she had no time for flirting while overseeing seedling rollouts, but Eloan waved away objections like fruit flies. A single dinner harms nothing, she insisted. Meanwhile, Eloan informed Orion that Calder was evaluating EcoPort partnerships and would be socially touring with Zephyra. She watched her son's pupil's contract. He asked tight-lipped whether this was prudent given media hazards. Eloan simply replied, "Observe and decide what you cherish." Friday evening arrived smelling of seaweed breeze and jasmine from the fog-wet gardenias. Zephyra wore a tea-green jumpsuit Eris had tailored from recycled silks. Calder arrived in a mahogany roadster that hummed on supercapacitors, hair perfect, grin glinting. Orion watched from the mezzanine, knuckles white on the rail, while Zephyra guided Calder toward Tower 15 where ghost orchids glowed. Calder praised the spectral blooms, praised Zephyra's metrics, praised everything with a salesman's velocity that made Orion's jaw ache. Eloan hosted dinner on the rooftop terrace. Lanterns floated in shallow, reflecting pools, and a private chef plated cedar-smoked sablefish. Calder monopolized conversation, recounting yacht regattas near Capri, quoting quantum age valuations, and sprinkling compliments over Zephyra like candied rose petals. Zephyra answered politely, yet kept glancing toward Orion, who pretended interest in his weather app. After dessert, Orion retreated to the drone lab, pulse slamming because jealousy felt both ridiculous and undeniable. He paced between carbon fiber quadcopters, algorithms swirling, until a reckless plan ignited. If data stories moved hearts, why not literal constellations? He opened the mission console, summoned a fleet of 80 drones normally used for agricultural mapping, and began coding choreography that would translate his feelings into night geometry. Downstairs, Calder proposed a weekend in Napa to discuss vertical farming over biodynamic Pinot. Zephyra hesitated, sensing subtext. Eloan intercepted, thanking Calder for interest yet suggesting he rest before tomorrow's boardroom tour. Disappointed but cordial, Calder departed. Zephyra exhaled as though stepping out of fluorescent glare. A note waited inside her studio. Look to the sky at 9. It bore Orion's minimalist signature. Curiosity overrode caution. She climbed rooftop stairs at 8:58, wind smelling of kelp and solder. Orion stood by the rail, coat unbuttoned, cheeks flushed with programming adrenaline. He said nothing, only tapped his wristcom. Down at harbor edge the drone fleet ascended, each diode blinking turquoise. They climbed to 400 feet, then snapped into grid alignment. Zephyra gasped as lights painted a luminous rendering of the ghost orchid, petals curling across half the sky. Drone shifted, drawing a compost helix, then the silhouette of Arturo Lys's kiln, then a small amber pendant casting shards. Each image lingered 10 seconds before reforming. Finally, the lights arranged into 7 words. Grow with me, Zephyra. Always. Wind tugged her hair, yet could not cool the bloom flushing her whole being. Orion stepped closer. "I tried to be discreet," he murmured. "Turns out I'm miserable at distance." Zephyra laughed, tears sparkling, and answered that compost teaches proximity. Only molecules willing to mingle become fertile. Orion grinned, took her hands, and in that charged hush they finally kissed. A real unedited merge that needed no algorithm. Overhead the drones dimmed into a single pulsing ring, like a guardian crown. Eloan watched unseen from the stairwell, relief softening the iron lines around her eyes. She signaled Marit to release contingency orchids for tomorrow's breakfast centerpiece. The provocation had succeeded, yet she felt a flicker of guilt for orchestrating hearts like market cycles. Still, the result glittered brighter than any sapphire. The next morning dawn caught Orion and Zephyra still on the roof, wrapped in one blanket, trading quiet dreams. Calder texted apologies for abrupt flirting, admitting he sensed unreadable gravitational pull between them. Ravian forwarded gossip links, already speculating about Frost Lys' engagement. Orion ignored them, preferring the engagement right before him. The way Zephyra's smile tightened at the edges of her eyes when she planned new seedling cycles. Breakfast featured ghost orchids floating in ice bowls. Symbol accepted, without words. Eris teased that drones outperformed sonnets. Priya advised legal trademarking of the sky message just in case. Marit presented performance reviews, slyly noting Zephyra had surpassed every benchmark except personal leave utilization. Zephyra promised a vacation once spring graphs rooted. Orion suggested Oahu research into salt-tolerant mangroves. Eloan rolled her eyes but secretly booked tickets. That evening Zephyra opened the ledger Soraya had given, adding fresh ink. Even orchestrated moments can sprout genuine hearts if honesty enters the soil before envy can root. She slid the book beside Orion's schematics. He wrote underneath, "Love is the ultimate closed-loop system, nothing wasted, everything repurposed into energy." Night returned, calmer. The drone fleet recharged in the barn, code logs archived. Yet one module remained aloft, hovering over Puget Sound, beacon light blinking Morse for any insomniac sailors. Grow with me, always. Far below, gulls traced lazy spirals, ignorant of algorithms and errors. Tide-pooled water reflected the message in trembling fragments, like seedlings catching moonlight. And though no market analyst could chart the curve, the Frost estate recorded its highest metric that year. 1 sustainable confession, 2 beneficiaries, exponential joy, and 0 regrets. Eloan closed her nightly journal after noting the figures. She wrote a final reminder to herself. Even the sharpest business plan requires light and water. The ink barely dried when she felt the mansion settle, like soil after rain, ready for whatever seeds tomorrow might demand. The following week delivered its own tests, because change invites scrutiny. Reporters camped beside the coastal bike trail, hoping to capture candid footage. Orion instituted a strict privacy perimeter, but Zephyra suggested a softer tactic. Invite the press for an hour-long demonstration of greenhouse carbon sinks, then let curiosity eclipse gossip. Eloan approved. The demo went viral for reasons nobody predicted. While discussing nitrogen uptakes, Zephyra and Orion unconsciously finished each other's sentences with chalk dust precision. And viewers flooded comment threads praising chemistry better than any rom-com. Stock climbed another point and relaunch donations spiked. Zephyra shrugged, saying truth pollination always boosts yield. That night they celebrated with a campfire by the tidal flats. Eris strummed a travel guitar, playing chords that smelled of pine pitch. Orion produced a tiny jar containing captured bioluminescent microbes, poured them into driftwood hollows, and watched blue fire dots shimmer. Zephyra leaned against a shoulder, understanding that extraordinary resources paired with gentleness can re-enchant ordinary spaces. In late spring, Soraya visited to inspect orchard graph success. She articulated open approval of the union, declaring she had not misread sapling signs. She presented Zephyra with a weathered compass whose needle had been replaced by a magnetized shard of recycled wind turbine blade. "Point this somewhere new," she challenged. Zephyra pocketed the relic, vowing to pilot projects in water-starved regions. Wedding speculation ballooned, yet Orion and Zephyra both craved patient seasons instead of Ferris wheel hurry. They scheduled a no-press research trip to Desert Kills where Zephyra Lys planned a solar-fired ceramic greenhouse. The night before departure, they revisited the terrace, where the drone confession had painted luminous vows. Orion asked if she still trusted improvised skies. She said she trusted roots that burrow, stems that climb, and data that verifies wonder. He opened a small cedar box, revealing 2 rings grown in a zero-waste foundry, one aluminum, one lab sapphire. Not proposing, he clarified. Just reserving tomorrow. Zephyra slipped the aluminum band onto her pinky and told him reservations were best kept flexible. They laughed, then wrote new root zone experiments on napkins until lanterns dimmed. As calendar quarters closed, EcoPort investors cited a mysterious, intangible resilience factor, bolstering earnings. Analysts finally labeled it the Zephyra effect. She rolled her eyes at the moniker but accepted the underlying truth. Relationships, when ethical, can outperform automation. On the anniversary of the deepfake scandal, they hosted a relaunch symposium titled Guardians of the Genuine. Students released paper seed drones over the bay, each device carrying lupin spores and a checksum. The spectacle echoed Orion's original confession, scaling affection into ecosystem service. Later that night, Zephyra Lys video called from Oaxaca, kiln fires flickering like captured comets. He congratulated them, then held up a fresh vase glazed in basil green, etched with binary code translating to grow together. Zephyra promised to fill it with greenhouse lavender. Orion promised to engineer shipping foam compostable enough to rival petals. The house finally settled into a season where headlines felt distant as gull cries. Yet once a month, Orion scheduled drone maintenance at midnight, and Zephyra joined, their laughter echoing through rafters as they updated firmware and sometimes spelled small constellations just for themselves: a juniper berry, a kiln, 2 interlocking rings. The sky never shared those images with the city. Not every miracle needed witnesses. One dawn, Zephyra awoke to find Orion absent and a trail of basil leaves leading to Tower 15. She entered, smelling ozone and mint, and found him beside an orchid erupting in rare indigo bloom. Around the planter lay printed patent documents assigning co-inventorship to Zephyra Lys. Orion said, "Partnership is my favorite confession." She replied that confession is her favorite fertilizer. They kissed again, wings whispering outside the glass. News later noted the indigo orchid captured more carbon per photon than any previous cultivar. Zephyra named it Lucent Promise, crediting Soraya, Eloan, Eris, and every voice that nudged 2 hesitant hearts. On a rare weekend free of deadlines, they kayaked among kelp forests. Seals surfaced, curious. Orion produced waterproof LED buoys shaped like tiny orchids, dropping them into emerald water, where kelp glimmered galaxy green. There, surrounded by living algorithms of tide and sun, he asked softly if she was ready for a longer research experiment, life side by side. She splashed him, then said yes, the shortest protocol ever approved. Wedding plans emerged organically, no aisle, only orchard rows, vows spoken beneath drone constellations mapping soil microbes, rings fired in Zephyra's solar kiln. Eloan volunteered logistics, promising 0 press leaks. Soraya insisted menu feature juniperberry glaze. Priya drafted a unity trust ensuring relaunch received donations instead of crystals. Marit rehearsed be-safe floral placements. Eris cultivated backup orchids. As invitations sprouted, Zephyra paused, reflecting on Eloan's original matchmaking gambit. She realized gratitude outweighed manipulation. One evening, she visited Eloan's study, offered fresh basil vinegar, and thanked her for daring to interfere. Eloan shrugged, yet her eyes shone brighter than drone LEDs. On Zephyra's desk rests the compass shard, the juniper bracelet, the aluminum ring, and a folded napkin containing soil from Juniper Ridge. Each token reminds her that ecosystems require many small provocations before balance blossoms. She closes her eyes, remembers drones painting ghost orchids, and prepares for tomorrow, the constant germinating miracle that love, like compost, never stops working even when night hides its heat. And somewhere beyond the greenhouse, a single drone still hovers, documenting weather data, blinking the original message in Morse, certain the sky will always be big enough for another truth written in light. The story of a matchmaking ruse, a jealous engineer, and a luminous confession thus completes its orbit, leaving only a final footnote. Sometimes data visualizes love, but love always recalibrates data. Arturo Lys had never seen a skyline rise behind engineered estuaries. But on the rain-washed morning the Frost electric shuttle rolled past the Fremont Bridge into downtown Seattle, he decided the city looked exactly like a kiln mid-fire, every glass pane glowing, every steel beam humming. His daughter sat beside him clutching discharge papers and a packet of anti-rejection tablets. Bracelet of juniper resin clicking softly whenever the wheels crossed expansion joints. Zephyra had slept 4 sporadic hours across 3 nights. Yet her eyes blazed like sunrise on wet adobe because they were bringing her father home, or rather to his new home, an apartment shaded by vertical gardens 1 block from the Frost greenhouse complex. Arturo still wore hospital socks, but the stubborn pallor of dialysis years had receded. Surgeons at Evergreen Medical had declared the graft textbook perfect. The anonymous donor, matched through a relaunch campaign that combined genomic ledgers with open lottery ethics, had gifted more than tissue, they had gifted velocity. Arturo whispered that the shuttle smelled of basil and second chances. Grandma Soraya waited curbside in her hydrogen pickup, silver braid escaping a cedar-colored beanie. She insisted on driving the final mile, claiming her truck's springs rode gentler than corporate shuttles. The apartment smelled of raw pine and basil. A remote nurse greeted them via wall panel, confirming sensor patches and medicine schedules. Arturo eased into a recycled bamboo recliner, eyes widening at the holographic mural of Juniper Ridge orchard painted by autonomous drones. Soraya placed a ceramic cup of prickly pear tea in his hands, then retreated, saying apprenticeships start with rest. Zephyra and Orion left him napping beneath a weighted blanket embroidered with drone constellations. Elevators carried them to the rooftop, now an education garden for neighborhood schools. 5th graders clustered around raised beds, planting seed papers printed with reliability checksums. Zephyra knelt and demonstrated cotyledon anatomy, Orion recording soil moisture while pretending not to stare at the glow on her cheekbones. Eloan watched from a balcony, satisfied the city chapter of the family test had entered its bloom phase. That evening Arturo tasted greenhouse salad, scarlet kometsuna, lemon marigold petals, micro basil, declaring it richer than any feast in Ciudad Juarez. He asked about Zephyra's deferred degree. She hesitated, then explained that the University of Cascadia had reinstated her scholarship after relaunch created a fellowship for students researching media integrity in agriculture. Classes began next week. Arturo beamed. He said knowledge is debt repaid forward. Orion added that EcoPort scheduled coursework-friendly shifts so research and romance could photosynthesize concurrently. Arturo chuckled, grateful the graft gave him strength to witness such sunlight. Transition weeks unfolded like carefully drawn blueprints. Arturo attended physiotherapy, walking loops among sapling citrus towers. Soraya coached him in mindful breathing, counting orchard hives. Priya arranged pro bono estate advice to shield transplant insurance from predatory billing. Eris engineered a dietary tracker using leaf conductivity sensors to suggest spice levels. Marit snuck contraband churros into the apartment after verifying glucose metrics. The house felt simultaneously larger and closer, like a greenhouse at dawn when fog unites distance. University life reintroduced Zephyra to pre-dawn tram rides, polymer notebooks, and campus espresso, whose surface tension reflected quantum forestry equations. Her major combined horticulture, data ethics, and acoustic forensics. Orion offered to drive her first morning, but she chose the tram, wanting to re-enter anonymity. Inside Lecture Hall 63, she spotted Lupin decals on laptops, evidence that relaunch curricula had traveled. Professor Imani Beckett opened the term with a case study comparing deepfake tomatoes to heritage cultivars, citing Zephyra's orchard footage. Classmates sought her notes. She shared freely, remembering drought years when generosity fertilized futures. Parallel to academia, wedding planning sprouted like volunteer mint. Zephyra had initially balked at spectacle, but Soraya coaxed her into envisioning a carbon-negative celebration functioning as environmental pilot. Invitations etched on mushroom leather asked guests to arrive via rail or hydrogen convoy. The venue would be the Forge Orchard during late summer when juniper shadows braided golden light. Power demands would be met by portable algae cells. Menus would mirror the farm's weekly regenerative boxes. Table cards doubled as seed packets for elders' gardens. Orion surprised her with an innovation. Biodegradable drone lanterns shaped like seeds, each containing an indigenous microbe capsule designed to fall harmlessly and enrich horizon soils. Zephyra retorted by designing living table runners of nitrogen-fixing crimson clover. They allocated half the budget to Relaunch's rural scholarship arm. Eloan jokingly complained there was nothing left for a champagne fountain. Orion promised upcycled rainwater sparkling with juniper essence. 3 weeks before the wedding, Arturo received approval from his transplant team to travel. He insisted on visiting the forge early to witness the orchard's resilience. The journey doubled as field class for Zephyra's campus peers. An electric bus carried 20 students and 2 professors into the high desert where thunderheads simmered. Arturo sat front row, lecturing on kiln airflow techniques that mirror greenhouse circulation. When the ranch gate appeared, he wiped mist from his eyes, mumbling that juniper had never smelled so hopeful. Preparation days vibrated with cooperative chaos. Ravian Frost, now 5 months into restorative service, arrived with a portable sawmill, donating juniper planks. Calanthe Rue ignored the event, but her absence no longer cast shade. Instead, Calder Riven turned up bearing trays of drought-proof lavender clones. Soraya conscripted guests into orchard maintenance. Orion's college roommates learned to splice strip tape. Rowena Viral's former assistant hand-painted wayfinding signs because redemption loves brushstrokes. Even the goats participated, trimming weeds along the solar fences with enthusiastic precision. On the eve of vows, Arturo requested a kiln firing. Soraya guided him to the workshop, where Orion had positioned solar mirrors. They loaded clay vessels etched with data glyphs representing heartbeat audios recorded during surgery. At midnight, the kiln vented copper flames, and everyone hummed a lullaby Zephyra remembered from Chihuahua nights. Glaze cooled into an iridescent skin that Soraya christened Reclaimed Aurora. Wedding dawn arrived lemon bright. Guests crossed straw-lined paths to seats woven from hemp cord. A silent wind turbine turned behind the barn, powering amps that would amplify nothing louder than acoustic guitar. Zephyra wore a gown stitched from upcycled parachute silk, dyed with indigo grown in rooftop planters. The fabric rippled like lake water. The juniper bracelet remained at her wrist, while the aluminum promise ring now shone on her left hand. Orion waited beneath a pergola built from Ravian's donated planks, wearing a suit woven from regenerated cellulose. Pocket square embroidered with ghost orchid silhouettes. The ceremony script had no officiant. Instead, the community read stanzas from a call-and-response poem. Arturo spoke first, voice steady, describing the kiln's heat as a teacher. Eris read lines about algorithms that choose integrity. Priya recited constitutional clauses on truth. When it was Zephyra's turn, she recounted the night drones painted orchids across a harbor sky. Orion recited the ledger line she had written at the forge: trust grips vigilance and generosity. They exchanged rings fired in Arturo's reclaimed aurora glaze, sealing vows with laughter that sounded like distant chimes. As rings settled, the drone fleet lifted, releasing seed lanterns that drifted west, dissolving into microbe confetti. Children chased luminous trails while guitar chords blended with wind chimes made from broken greenhouse glass. A kestrel swooped through, Unplanned yet perfect, verifying ecological alignment. The feast followed zero-waste protocol. Plates crafted from leaf pulp held roasted squash, azul corn tortillas, solar-seared oyster mushrooms, and salvaged apple galette sweetened with honey from hives Maro the beekeeper had installed after the forge firestorm. Guests posted photos with carbon counts instead of hashtags. News outlets attempted drones of their own, but border sensors denied entry. Coverage relied on live streams shared freely. At dusk, Soraya guided Arturo to the orchard ledger. He signed a new page. Today's soil taught me to accept water without questioning cloud origin. He passed the pen to Zephyra, who wrote, "Legacy is loyalty measured by roots that outlive architects." Orion added, "Data married emotion and nothing corrupted." Beneath, Eloan inscribed a quiet footnote. Even strategists must believe in miracles. Night draped indigo. Orion replayed the harbor confession, constellations rewriting their proposal, now encircling one additional phrase. Begin again. Begin again. Rain threatened, but droplets evaporated before landing, as though respecting energy budgets. Soraya raised a biodegradable cup of sea buckthorn cider and toasted to kidneys, cameras, and compost. Classes resumed after a short honeymoon cataloging mangrove microbes in Kauai. Zephyra rode the tram each dawn, grateful for ordinary 15-minute commutes. She published her first paper, co-authored with Soraya, on perennials sequestering carbon in basalt dust soils. Peer reviewers praised the fusion of ancestral practice and spectral imaging. Arturo audited the online version, leaving annotated emojis. Orion expanded EcoPort's greenhouse count to include 2 satellite labs staffed by relaunch apprentices. The labs produced data and mentorship simultaneously, a dual crop. In winter, Arturo joined Zephyra on campus for a seminar titled Kiln, Code, and Chlorophyll. He described how clay shrinkage resembles algorithmic loss functions. Students applauded the metaphor. One requested an internship at the forge. After class, Zephyra and her father shared cafecito under cedar eaves, marveling that new kidney numbers looked like sunrise gradients. Spring equinox triggered the orchard's first indigo orchid wave. Scientists visited, measuring pigment spectra. Newspapers coined lucent promise the hope flower, though Zephyra preferred its Latin binomial Phalaenopsis veritas. Demand surged, but Orion capped distribution, insisting rarity cultivates wisdom. Revenue diverted to a transplant travel fund pairing organ recipients with regenerative farms. Arturo became ambassador, recording videos while pruning apple limbs. On the anniversary of the wedding, a public festival celebrated relaunch, reaching $100 million in match donations. Kids launched paper drones over the bay, each device carrying lupin spores and a checksum. Zephyra read dozens aloud, tears tracking smile lines. Orion whispered that datasets had never sounded more melodic. That night they returned to the rooftop where all crises once began. The city glowed, but felt hushed. Zephyra placed her Juniper bracelet beside Orion's watch. She said campuses teach theory, orchards teach patience, and family teaches both. He answered by producing a small clay sphere Arturo had fired. Inside tinkled a seed of ghost orchid and a micro SD card containing the year's ledgers. They cracked it, planted it in rooftop soil, and covered it together. Below, in an apartment fragrant with basil, Arturo brewed hot chocolate and etched a new design for a potable ceramic greenhouse he intended to prototype next solstice. His kidney numbers remained stellar. His daughter remained unstoppable. The city outside pulsed like a kiln in mid-fire, shaping every shard into future constellations. Stars wheeled overhead. Silent guardians, while distant container ships hooted, their foghorns echoing vows anew, promising commerce could harmonize with ecology when guided by relentless, patient, data-anchored love and inspiration. And that brings us to the end of today's story on Truistery Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.